Hello.
Hello.
Hello. I think we have everyone here. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Ian Fregosi, and I am a legislative aide to Supervisor Connie Chan. So we're here today to talk about a resolution that was introduced by Supervisor Chan and co-sponsored by Supervisors Ronan, Marr, and Walton, urging the prioritization of small property owners and affordable housing providers for public rent relief funds, and urging large corporate landlords to negotiate with their tenants associations and provide their own rent relief before dipping into limited public funds. So we have a really diverse group of supervisors, tenants, and small property owners that are here today to speak, and I'm really excited to hear from all of them. And after all of our speakers, we should have time for a short question and answer period. So without further ado, I am going to call up our first speaker, Supervisor Connie Chan. Take it away, Connie.
Thank you so much, Ian. Well, I'm Connie Chan, supervisor for District 1, and I want to thank all of you so much for being here today. We're here for a really good cause. San Francisco will be receiving $54 million in rent relief funds from the state and federal government, thanks to SB 91 and the CARES Act. But according to a recent report from the budget legislative analyst, tenants in San Francisco, in our city, have accumulated over $100 million in rental debt because of the pandemic. That's twice the amount of available public funds for rent relief. So we all know, and it's the reason why we're all here, we need to make it add up. The funds from the state and federal government are critical, but we also know it's not enough to support the thousands of tenants in San Francisco staring down thousands of dollars in rent debt. So we need to be creative. The reality of San Francisco and many cities is that we have an uneven playing field for landlords. On one hand, we have an array of small mom and pop landlords, many who only have a handful of tenants, no staff on their payroll, and they're likely to have a mortgage on their property. Some may also rely as their income and even retirement. So then we have like larger corporate landlord, and while these larger corporate landlords are operating housing for hundreds, if not thousands of tenants, including in San Francisco, they have incredible amounts of capital. They are big business. They're corporate business with big profit. Some have been expanding their portfolios even in the middle of this pandemic. These corporate landlords also have the ability to track new funding opportunities and how to access them. And we know it, we've seen it. But what all this means is that corporate landlords also have the flexibility to provide direct relief to their tenants. So given that we know the relief funds from the government are not enough, we need corporate landlords to dig deep while tenants are digging deeper and to come to the table. We're asking today that large corporate landlords work with their tenants association and use their existing resource to provide relief to their tenants. If corporate landlords can leverage their existing assets to provide direct relief to their tenants, from their own businesses, then that allows funds from the states to forgive rent for tenants of smaller landlords who don't have the ability to voluntarily offer more relief than they already have. This is about serving all tenants. And to do that, we need corporate landlords who have the resources to step up, work with their tenants and forgive their rent directly. Small property owners, and I think you will hear from some of them today with us, they need more support from the government. If we don't prioritize these rent relief resources for mom and pop landlords who are already struggling to get by, there's a huge risk that not only will their tenants be displaced, but also that the small landlords go under. We don't want to see that, definitely not in San Francisco. And we do actually have a lot of small landlords in the Richmond, the district that I represent. And they will be brought out and gobbled up by large corporate landlords, which further hurts our tenants, all tenants. That's why I introduced the resolution last week urging large corporate landlords like Veritas, which we all know, to negotiate rent relief with their tenants associations and use their own resources so that limited public funds can be prioritized for small property landlords and affordable housing providers. The resolution also calls for the city to step up its culturally competent outreach and distribution of rent relief funds to small property owners and affordable housing providers. Again, with the expectation that corporate landlords leverage their existing capital to provide relief for their tenants. I really want to end this by saying that I am disappointed. I'm very disappointed that Veritas has responded to this reasonable ask by trying to scare their tenants. It's unreasonable and it's unfathomable into believing that this resolution is going to prevent them from applying for rent relief. We know it's not true. So I want to be very clear. Let me be very clear today. We're simply asking Veritas and other corporate landlords to do the right thing. Come to the table with their tenants associations to negotiate their own rent relief agreement before dipping into limited public funds. I want to thank all the tenants and definitely, those who are brave, to join us here, and the small property owners too, who are agree to be with us today and unite on this issue. I want to thank my colleagues, really thankful, Supervisor Hillary Ronen, and Supervisor Gordon Marr for being here, supporting this resolution. Thank you all again for being here. And I also want to thank Ian Fregosi on my team for working with all of you and pushing this resolution forward. So thank you. And I want to turn this back to Ian now.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Chan. I also want to shout out Lee Hepner here, who's from Supervisor Aaron Peskin's office. Supervisor Peskin was planning on joining us today, but unfortunately had to respond to an emergency in his district in real time. And so now I want to bring up our next speaker, Supervisor Hillary Ronen. Thank you so much, Supervisor Ronen.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Supervisor Chan, for leading on this issue that is so important and for bringing us all together. Sorry, I am so glad to join you and speak with you today. A full year ago, I joined with several of my colleagues on the board and local electeds across the country to call on state and federal officials to cancel rent and mortgage payments. We had no idea then that the shutdown would last as long as it has, but even so, the fear of mounting debt and potential for loss of housing was terrifying. We've done our best locally to support tenants for the short term by preventing evictions, especially through the legislation authored by Supervisor Dean Preston. But with no support from the previous administration in Washington, tenants and small landlords have been left to wonder, how are they supposed to manage the pileup of debt during this pandemic? At long last, we are about to see several federal and local rent relief programs become available. But unfortunately, these programs are rolling out in a way that will be confusing and potentially tricky for tenants and landlords. There are federal funds that went to the state with a portion reserved for San Francisco. Distribution of these are subject to California Senate Bill 91 rules, which, quite frankly, favor landlords. There are also federal rent relief supports coming directly from the city, as well as local Prop I funds, again, thanks to Supervisor Preston for his amazing ballot measure. The Mayor's Office of Housing is working on details for administering these funds right now. And we are here today to say that these funds must go first to the most vulnerable tenants, to small landlords, and to our affordable housing providers. It is crucial that we include enforceable, equity-positive measures, including language and technical assistance to get these scarce local funds to tenants and small landlords who need help. One of the most glaring issues that has defined the pandemic is the appalling inequity in how people have been individually affected. It is our lowest wage service workers who have lost employment, communities of color who've gotten sickest, poorer neighborhoods that are now filled with tents and RV homes, rent-controlled tenants who most fear the end of the eviction moratorium, and small landlords who are holding on by their fingernails as they face a mountain of debt. And then we see a corporation like Veritas Investments with 260 buildings in San Francisco alone and $3 billion in assets, which managed to snap up $3.6 million in federal PPP support while our mom and pop shops were stuck scrambling. And then they managed to come up with $43 million in private dollars in the midst of a pandemic to purchase a fancy Nob Hill building. I have to question if and why they need public money. By now, as rent relief programs are finally getting off the ground, Veritas is making another grab at public funding, establishing themselves as the gatekeeper to tenants' access to relief. Let's be clear, California Senate Bill 91, which established the programming criteria for federal rent relief funds that are channeled through the state, gives power to landlords to pick and choose which tenants to save. And if a large corporate landlord pushed their way to the front of the line, there will be little left for small landlords and tenants. My office has been working with the citywide Veritas Tenants Association. I want to give a shout out and thanks to Amy Beinart in my office who's been doing the heavy lift of this work, which is asking their well-resourced landlord to negotiate in good faith to come up with the rent relief terms that protect all tenants. We have been trying to help get an initial meeting scheduled, but frankly, Veritas and Greentree have been stalling for weeks and weeks, essentially questioning the fundamental rights of their tenants to organize. This is classic anti-organizing tactics, and we will not stand silent in its midst. Tenants and small property owners who are finally digging out of the worst year ever, we see you, we hear you, and we will fight like hell to make sure you get the help that you need. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Ronan. That was awesome. Yes, major shout out to Veritas Tenants Association. I know we have some members here today. We're going to hear from one very soon. But first, we have Supervisor Mar, the last supervisor for today. Thank you, Supervisor Mar, for joining us.
Sure, thank you, Ian. And thank you so much to Supervisor Chan and also the tenant organizations and the small property owner groups for really working together on this such an important issue to address the housing crisis and really the debt crisis that's grown so severe during the pandemic. And I just wanted to start by saying that I've been working to incentivize homeowners to add accessory dwelling units to their properties through fee waivers and technical assistance. And I'm also exploring a special financing program as well. And this is an important strategy to address our housing crisis by creating new rental housing that's relatively affordable in neighborhoods like the Sunset in Richmond that are mostly single family homes. Almost all of the homeowners who have added ADUs in my district are small property owners, mostly Chinese and other immigrant families who rely on the rental income for their economic security, their college savings for their kids or retirement. And these small property owners often have better relationships with their tenants than large landlords and also charge below market rate for the units because it may be their primary residence and they value a harmonious relationship with their downstairs tenants. So I've heard from many small property owners who've lowered or deferred rent over the past year to support their long-term tenants who are unemployed, but who are also struggling financially themselves as a result. And it's only getting harder as the months go by. The rent relief funds from the federal and state government, and also from Proposition I locally, as my colleagues have stated, are incredibly important in supporting tenants and small property owners. But it's also important to ensure that the rent relief program is fully accessible to non-English speaking landlords and tenants, given who the small property owners are. And because these funds are not enough to fully cover the huge amount of unpaid rent accumulated over the past year, it's very important that we prioritize these resources to small property owners and tenants. who are much more economically vulnerable and needy than the large landlords, and especially than the big real estate corporations like Veritas. So I joined with my colleagues in calling for corporate landlords to voluntarily provide their own rent relief before dipping into these much needed public rent relief funds that should be prioritized to tenants and small property owners. So thanks again to all of you for working on this important issue. And there's much more work to be done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Mar. I want to call up next member of the Veritas Tenants Association, Juana May, and we have Maria Zamudio, who is going to be doing Spanish to English interpretation as well. Do we have Juana here?
Yeah, if I can just say, Juana will say her whole entire statement and then I will interpret after.
Great, thank you.
Hola, buenos días. Mi nombre es Juana May y soy miembro de la Asociación de Inquilinos de Veritas. Vivo aquí en el Tenderloin con mis hijos. Quiero agradecer a los supervisores de pequeños propietarios y otras asociaciones de inquilinos por estar unidos hoy. Este es un momento importante para todos nosotros. ¿Sigo, María?
Sí, sígale, Juana, yo lo hago después cuando termine.
Ok. Perdí mi trabajo al comienzo de la pandemia. No he podido pagar la renta durante 12 meses. Sé que podía intentar solicitar ayuda como una sola persona, pero es más importante para mí el poder ayudar a mis vecinos en la asociación de inquilinos y apoyar a los pequeños propietarios como los que están en la llamada en esta mañana. Esa es mi elección y es la elección de muchos y otros inquilinos. Esperamos que Veritas respete nuestra elección. Hago esta elección porque creo en la dignidad y la asociación. Si Veritas nos respeta a mí y a mis vecinos, entonces pedimos negociaciones para llegar a un acuerdo que sea satisfecho nuestra necesidad, porque no es mi culpa y de nadie no poder haber pagado la renta. Gracias por la oportunidad de poder hablar esta mañana. Ya, María.
Hi, good morning. My name is Juana May. I'm a member of the Veritas Tenant Associations and I live in the Tenderloin with my son. Thank you to all the supervisors and small property owners and the other associations, the other tenant associations who are here with us today. This is a moment that is incredibly important for all of us. I lost my job at the beginning of the pandemic and I have not been able to pay my rent for the last 12 months. I could try and access support, but I am only one person, an individual. For me, it is much more important to support my neighbors and the association, the Tenants Association, and to support the small property owners who are on this call today. That's my decision. And it is the decision of many other tenants and many tenants associations. I hope that Veritas respects our decision because it's a decision that we make knowing and believing in the dignity of the association. If Veritas does not respect me and my neighbors, then I ask them to negotiate with us an agreement that will help us meet our needs, because it's not our fault that we haven't been able to pay rent. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you so much. Gracias, Juana. I want to call up our next speaker, Maeve Elise Brown, who is the Executive Director of Housing and Economic Rights Advocates. Thank you so much for being here, Maeve.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I am so appreciative of this measure that's been introduced, and it really highlights an issue that became near and dear to my heart during this pandemic, which is the challenge for small landlords really of surviving. And it's been really clear from our work that much of the burden of the policies during this pandemic that have attempted to address the fact that people are out of work as a result. A lot of the burden of this financial has been put on the shoulders of small mom and pop landlords. And in an ethnic news media briefing that I put together with a colleague of mine, one of the next speakers, used the word housing provider, which I love. My amendment to that is affordable housing provider. These are people who are providing affordable rental housing across our state, locally and across our state, but are not getting any credit for it. When we use the word affordable housing, we think about nonprofit housing developers. And I've learned over our last 2 years of contracting with Oakland's rent adjustment program, which really deepened our office's work in providing basic information to small landlords, how incredibly diverse that population is, how incredibly debt burdened the population is, and how their interests really actually, there's a connection between their interests and those of their tenants, that their relationship with their tenants, almost without exception, is what mattered the most to them, helping their tenants remain stable. There's been nobody in the last 2 years that I've worked with as a small landlord who was, let me put this in the affirmative, all of the small landlords that I've talked to in the past 2 years were charging less than market rate rent. And they were aware that they could raise the rent legally and didn't want to do so because they wanted to maintain a stable relationship with their tenants. So this is an opportunity, the light that you're shining through this proposed measure on the importance of small landlords as affordable housing, rental housing providers is just fabulous. I also want to emphasize they have not gotten access themselves to the PPP form funds that larger entities were able to access. And yet they're carrying significant mortgage debt. And it's, for people of color and immigrants and women in our country, being a mom and pop housing provider is supposed to be a safe way to build a little bit of equity to help put the kids and the grandkids through college and try to make a dent in the racial and gender-based gap that we have in our country. So I think that this measure is the start of, I hope, more conversations about the importance of this block of folks in our state and the importance of having more nuanced policy making that takes into account their needs and what they give to our communities as affordable housing providers. So thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much, Maeve. I really appreciate that. Next up, we have John Yen Wong, who's a small property owner and the founding chairman of Asian Real Estate Association. Thank you for being here, John.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Supervisors Chen, Ronan, Mar, and Peskin in absentia for the opportunity to participate in this press conference. As mentioned that I am the founding chairman of the Asian Real Estate Association of America, which numbers over 17,000 members in 41 chapters across the country, including a very vibrant one in San Francisco and others in the neighboring greater San Francisco Bay Area. Now, in context, over the course of my life in San Francisco, I have been a tenant. I have been a housing provider who rented out property to tenants. I've been a homeowner, and I've been an active real estate broker for over 40 years. And I applaud the resolution that is being announced in this press conference because historically, as Lon said, housing providers and their tenants have had amicable business relationships. And that's because the smaller properties are hands-on managers. When something broke in the property, they went themselves to try and fix it. And because of that, there were amicable relationships that developed between these housing providers and those who lived in their units. But over the years in San Francisco, the relationships have frayed, and now it is not uncommon for the parties to demonize each other. I applaud the fact that one silver lining of the pandemic, it has reawakened the reality and the importance of a healthy symbiotic relationship between the housing providers and those tenants who live in their home, live in these properties. I applaud the San Francisco Board of Supervisors for seeking solutions to help housing providers who are typically these owners of the small rental properties. The funds available number in the billions. And while for most of us, billions sounds like big numbers, the grim reality is that these funds are far from what is needed to make all housing providers whole. Smaller property owners may be disadvantaged in the application process because they lack the comfort and familiarity to navigate the application system. Some property owners, many property owners in San Francisco are of ethnic minority heritage, and some may be less comfortable in English than they are in another language. For those housing providers, even getting the instructions on how to apply may be a challenge. It is critical that all housing providers be given the equitable chance to apply fairly for the limited funds. The state of California's housing provider relief program, called Housing is Key, recognizes this need and somewhat parallel to the rational tiered system for distribution of COVID-19 vaccines, has a similar tiered system that makes priority for those in greatest need. The resolution passed by the supervisors has similar intent to provide equitable access to apply, to have housing providers apply fairly for the available funds. And ARIA and I personally support this. Over the course of my life, I have always been a housing activist. For the last 40 years in my professional career as a realtor, I have also been a housing provider activist. Given the big picture and the long view, the needs of both are very much the same. Thank you for this opportunity to participate.
All right, thank you so much, John. Thank you so much for being here. So we have next up Bryant Fuang, who is a small landlord in the Tenderloin. And I know Bryant was having some issues with audio earlier. I don't know, Brian, are you there? If not, I think we have your statement. We can read it. I think Bryant's still having issues. I'm going to go ahead and just read Bryant's statement since he's unable to join on the audio. So good morning, everyone. My name is Bryant Fuang, and I'm a small landlord in the Tenderloin, District 6 of San Francisco. I want to thank the supervisors, fellow small landlords, and tenant associations for standing together today. I own one apartment building in the city, and tenants have unpaid rent. For big landlords, the unpaid rent may cut into their profit. For me, it cuts into my family's savings. I urge the city to prioritize small landlords in the distribution of limited public funds. And I urge large corporate landlords like Veritas, Mosser, and Ballast to negotiate with their tenant associations. Thank you. And so I want to thank Bryant for being here and apologize at the about the technical difficulties, but we really appreciate your statement. And last but not least, well, before I bring up these last two speakers, I want to actually just give a quick shout out to the Mosser tenants who are in the room, part of the Mosser Tenants Association. And Maria, if you could please translate for them, we really appreciate them being here.
Ian le está mandando apreciaciones a los miembros de la Asociación de Inquilinos de Maser y gracias por estar aquí.
Gracias. Thank you so much. And I would like to welcome up our last speakers, Dave Masson and Amy Yu with the Ballast Tenants Association.
Good morning. I'm Dave Masson, representing the Ballast Tenants Association along with Amy Yvonne Yu. We want to thank Supervisors Chan, Mar, and Ronan for being here, as well as Supervisor Peskin's staff. And we also want to say thanks to the small landlord representatives who have been on. Amy?
So we are the Ballast Brick and Timber Tenants Association citywide, which is formed. They own over 100 buildings in the city. It's super important to me personally to hear about this that you're working on. So I thank you all for your hard work, because I've been a long-term tenant in the city for over 20 years, 17 years in this building, which Ballast now own. And I truly understand the disparity between a small landlord ownership versus a large one such as this, because I've had two small landlords in the past and they've been lovely and responsive and I know them, whereas these bigger corporations, they don't care about you. At best, they are non-responsive. At worst, which is most of the time, they are predatory and abusive landlord, which is what many of us are experiencing in town. They care about their profits rather than the people, even during a pandemic. So I truly feel strongly about this measure in helping small landlords and tenants, because we need affordable housing, especially in the city in a time during a pandemic when so many people have hurt so much that truly need the help, rather than these big corporations that are maybe making less money and while being still greedy. So thank you again, and we support your efforts, and we hope to work directly with Ballast and Brick and Timber in coming to some kind of agreement on this.
Thank you so much, Dave and Amy. Really appreciate you both for being here and doing the work that you do. So those are our final speakers. So I just want to open it up for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. If folks are able to stick around, if members of the press have any questions for any of the speakers. Okay, looks like we have a question from Laura Waxman with the SF Business Times for Supervisor Chan. Are there any updates to MoCD's process for distributing rent relief funds? And can you elaborate on your on Veritas's response to your resolution? Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you, Laura, for the question. So the resolution has been introduced and it's going to the committee tentatively scheduled for Monday, April 5th. And at that time that the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development will come forward and to really further explain the distribution process. Obviously, this is happening and they are just working on it and developing and they're trying to figure out. Frankly, initial response from the Mayor's Office of Housing, actually we're aligned and on the same page where we know that this is really about helping tenants. So the focus is going to be prioritizing tenants that are in need. And then, how can we make sure that with that, we can prioritize small property owners. And those are the things that will be, as we're now working it out. And it's actually exactly why we actually have this resolution, so that we can give, as a board of supervisors, can give direction as a policymaker to, our city departments and say, this is what we need you to do and how we need you to prioritize small property landlords. So those are the things that still are in discussion, and we're going to have more details come forth on April 5th when we're in committee. Now, when it comes to Veritas, I think we have seen email that was sent to tenants that was threatening the tenants and letting them know that this resolution is going to prevent them from getting relief, preventing tenants from getting relief. So that is the official response from Veritas at this moment to our resolution. And if you're interested, I think Ian can share with you a copy of that email so you can see directly black and white in the email the response from Veritas to our resolution.
Thank you, Supervisor Chan. If there's no other questions from members of the press, oh, we have one more from Ida Mahajadeb. Let me see. What's the timeline to roll out the relief funds? That is also, I think I'll just refer to Supervisor Chan's last response. We're waiting to get those details from both from the state and from the Mayor's Office of Housing. So we're still waiting to see what the timeline is going to look like, and we're hoping to learn more.
And that we actually have to, as a city, we actually have to accept the funding coming from state as well. So there's going to be a legislative process to accept the relief fund from state government through SB 91.
And so we have, looks like one last question here from Libby Staub of the Veritas Tenants Association. Will there be another chance for public comment during or after committee meeting? Yes, there will be a chance for public comment during the committee meeting. So as Supervisor Chan mentioned, it's tentatively scheduled for April 5th at the Land Use and Transportation Committee, which meets at 1:30 p.m. On Mondays. So that would be the opportunity to make public comment. So thank you all so much for being here today. Tenants, small property owners, supervisors, staff, members of the press, we really appreciate it. And let's keep pushing. We got a lot of work to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. See you soon.